Cool. So today we're going to go through Power BI for data validation. Now, that's the mechanism. I'm going to teach a very basic introduction to Power BI. There's a lot you can do with it, and I'll go over some of the other stuff later on. But before I go any further, just who I am. You probably don't know who I am. I'm Andrew Waring. I run a company called Virtual-PHi, and you'll be forgiven to not know that company because it started 1 year ago today, so it's relatively new. I'm a chartered architect. I'm based in Scotland, not from my accent, I'm from Belfast. Been doing BIM management for a number of years, and some of the dashboards I'll give you an example of at the end kind of reflect some of the work I've done with architecture practices, although it's applicable to anyone. BSI qualify for both project and asset management. I run the Glasgow Revit user group. If you're ever in Glasgow during that time, it's good to have a beer. Along with being a member of the Uniclass Advisory Forum, and chair a working flow group with the REN insurers as well. So it's all about kind of making sure that what we're doing is not going to get us into trouble as much as anything. So just a quick note on Virtual-PHi. There's only 5 slides here, so I'll get straight into the program in a minute. Virtual-PHi are an information manager. We're born from an architecture practice called Holmes Miller. And we're pretty much started doing that role because we recognize there's a gap with our clients in terms of being able to specify their information correctly and then validating that information. So really we started this business to try and step into that market to help them out. But obviously that's now grown arms and legs, and we do quite a lot of other things. So we do help clients, contractors, consultants. We do a lot of community engagement as well with a lot of education over in Scotland. But to cut to the chase, the agenda today effectively is to go over Power BI as a high-level concept, how it sits within the Power Suite from Microsoft, and then we'll go straight into actually building a dashboard. So we'll be looking at how to import information, how to aggregate it, how to transform that information to get meaningful data from it, how to merge the information together so that when it sits next to each other, it knows what other bits are and how it relates to other bits and pieces. Then probably the most important bit, visualizing that data so it actually means something to someone who doesn't understand the background data in there. Doing some calculations as well with DAX. Don't panic, I'm not going to actually show you how to code. It's going to be very straightforward. We'll use some of the built-in functions to generate the code for us. Data modeling in terms of making sure, as I said, all the data kind of comes together and sits nicely together. Advanced editor, if we get time, we'll go into some of the basic concepts. So when you're Googling how to do something later on, you might know how to then bring that information into the model quickly. Because that's something that eluded me for quite a while, is someone showed me how to do something and I was like, that's great, but how does that actually go into the program for me just to copy and paste someone else's solution? Which is 90% of what I do, by the way. It's just taking everyone else's ideas and merging them together. Then some example uses we'll go over at the end, kind of to show you some of the other maybe you didn't realize aspects of what Power BI can do. But to kind of start off, I've not got much to show you in terms of what Power BI actually is other than an interface. So if you are following along, this is the URL. I did email out to some people before, but this will allow you to download some COBie data sets. I didn't create the COBie data sets, they're from the classification manager, and I did mess them up to demonstrate why they're wrong. So if you want to download some of that, that'll be in there. The presentation, as short as it was, will be in there as well. You don't need to use the COBie data sets there. If you are going along on your own, you can use your own COBie data sets. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be sharing all my dashboards with you because obviously intellectual property and some of it has very sensitive information in it, so I'm not going to be showing some of them as well. But to go in, Power BI and what you might interact with it on a day-to-day basis looks like this. But really, Power BI is a massive amount of service infrastructure from Microsoft. So while this is the editor I'm going to show today, you can use for free. You can share this dashboard you create today with anyone you want. The back end of it is you can upload to a Power BI service, which integrates in with things like Power Apps, Power Automate, previously called Flow or one or the other. So it sits within an ecosystem to allow you to effectively scale this up. So you're not sharing the file with hundreds of people. You're actually hosting a service online off that dashboard that people can then pull information out of. I'm not going into any of that today because it's pretty high level in terms of how to do like specifying your own data extracts and models and all that stuff. What I'm going to go through today is literally how to build the simplest of simple dashboards, but using COBie as a foundation for that. So just to show you what the end result's going to look like before we go in. I forgot to ask, everyone hear me okay? Everyone see that okay? Good. So this is what we're going to build today. Now, whether we get to all of this, I don't know. I haven't timed out how long this takes. So bear with me. If you have any questions while I'm doing this, put your hand up and we'll talk through them. But effectively, this dashboard checks, are your space descriptions filled in the COBie space spreadsheet? And the space references on the component spreadsheet, do they exist in the space spreadsheet? Sounds simple. What Power BI allows you to do is specify the rule sets and transformations up front, and then when you've got any other data in the same format, you can fire it into a folder, click refresh, and it will give you the new information. So that's the kind of power of Power BI. Forgive my accent, I realize I say power weird, but Power BI. I'll continue as it was. So effectively, this dashboard is going to allow you to effectively click on the things that fail, click on the things that pass. You can go in and drill down into your spaces and see all the components within that space, and you can see if they have any passes or fails in them. Pretty high level stuff. When I get onto the examples, I'll show you this expanded out to 89% of the schema NBIM rule sets. I haven't finished it yet, so 89%. But this is kind of what we're going to follow along with. So first things first, let's get it to look right. So you start a new Power BI. Some of the refreshes and things take a wee while, so I'm going to ad-lib during that. I'm not going to sing, don't worry. So the first thing you'll do is effectively get a new source. Now, when you open Power BI, it might ask you to log in and things for what I'm going to show you today. And for 80% of the not particularly secure way of using Power BI, you can use it without any kind of login details. You can just skip it. So what we're going to do is effectively get some data. So conveniently, the button says Get Data, so we're clicking that. We're going to drop it down. What we're going to do is aggregate a folder of Excels together straight away. So I've got a folder of Excels. I will go to More in here. Now, just a pause on the screen that will eventually come up. This isn't a fast laptop. There is an amazing amount of data sources you can pull into Power BI. Some of these, not all of them, you can set to automatically refresh online at set intervals. Some of it you can have direct queries to. You can build your model so they just have live information. A lot of CDEs, a lot of different kind of digital twin platforms or project management platforms, CRMs, now have custom connectors and ways of integrating into their platform, either directly through API or through their provided custom third-party connector. There's a lot of different ways to pull data in. One of the most reliable methods and the most intuitive method is to pull in a folder. So we could pull in an Excel, but we're not going to do that. We're going to pull in a folder, click Connect, and this will ask you where the folder is. Now, if I go browse here, if you've got a network connection, you're not going to be able to browse to it. So the best way to do this is to find where the folder is and get the path of it. So I've got the folder just here. And I'm just going to take this path and paste it in and click OK. And that's it. Class done. No. So what it's then going to do is going to list all the files that are in that folder. You see I've got a few different ones. Now I have renamed them slightly to have a date prefix, which will come up later on. But other than that, they're just COBie spreadsheets that we received. Several different dates. You can see one there said, one's A, so they're different model authors. And what we're going to do is we can either combine it and load it, combine it and transform it, or just transform it. For the easiest way of aggregating data, we just go combine and transform data. What that will do is it will effectively take the first file on that list, figure out the headings off that Excel. We'll ask you for the sheet first. Figure out the headings off that sheet, and then use that to then merge every other sheet into it, every other sheet, same sheet within another Excel. So if we go in here and we pick the space sheet, it will load up the first Excel that's on there, and that will bring that in like this. So the first thing we're really going to tackle here when you look at the data in there is there's a lot of random columns that we don't need. So we're going to tackle that first. But if we click OK, this will bring up something called Power Query. So not to be confused, Power Query is not just Power BI. It can actually be used with Excel as well. So if you were to go into Excel, go into data and load in data that way, the interface, the transforms are actually entirely the same. You can actually copy and paste all the transforms from Excel Power Query into Power BI Power Query. It's the same back end. So what I'm showing you today is in Power BI for visualization. But if you just wanted to transform the data and get out a whole bunch of tables and then go in and do Excel's codes on top of that, you can absolutely do that from what you're learning today. So you can see here it brings in a transform file, and in there is a sample file. Now, as I said, this is the first file on the list. If I go back to source here, you'll see it's actually navigating to one of the files. And what that allows me to do is apply transformations that will get which will transform all the Excels that are in that folder first before it puts them together and appends one to the end of the other. We're not going to do anything with that today, but you can do that. So for example, if I wanted to change the created by column to be called something else for all the Excels now, I could do it in this transform file, and it would actually change the column header for all the Excel files. But if we go into Kobe Excels here, you can see this is now, well, you won't be able to see, but this is a longer appended list of all the Excels, all the Kobe space sheets in all those Excels, all in one table. So if you're interested in just merging everything together, there you go, you've done it. We're just going to be a bit tidier here now. There is ways and means of operating a lot tidier than what I'm going to show you today. If you are in any way knowledgeable about Power BI, please forgive me for not renaming things as I go, because we just don't have time. But there we go. So it can contain a period, first mistake. So Kobe space. I am renaming this one because it is important for this class. So first thing we're going to do here is get rid of these columns. Easiest thing to do. Select the columns you want to keep. So we'll go along and we'll hold down Shift to net area, and then we'll right click and we'll remove other columns. Now there's several ways to skin that cat. What this requires is those columns stay the same name. If you wanted those columns to be anything other than something that starts with column, you would go into the transform data, you would do stuff, which I'm not going to go into, and do it a different way. So everything I'm showing you today, there's probably 6 or 7 ways of actually tackling the problems. But there we go, got rid of all the random columns. The next thing we want to do is have a look at our description, and you can see we've got nulls in here. What we can do is apply transformations. So there's 2 ways of doing this. You can either transform the column directly, which will make sure, so if I wanted to replace all the word corridor with the word space, I could do that on this column and it will just replace it all. What I can also do is I can add a column. So these are these 2 tabs up here. So with transform, I could do this, but I want to retain the data. I want to add an extra column to say, does this column actually pass or fail this value? So what I can do is click add a column, conditional column, and it's, forgive me if this all sounds very easy because it is. This is everyone can do this. So we go in, let's do the description check. And it's basically just drop down. So if description equals null, which means it's not been filled in, then fail. You can add into this and you can add multiple onto it. So if description equals NA, fail. And if you want to be extra careful, we could go in and go description equals NA, like this, and capture the capitals, fail. But for everything else, we can pass. And there we go, we've got our fail pass check on here. Simple as that. Is everyone following so far? Cool. If you weren't, I would say you're going to struggle for the next bit, but there we go. So that's how quickly you can do this. Just to show you how quickly this is going to go into a dashboard, is I will load this in, I'll apply changes. This will now load in Kobe.space. There we go. I am in not the fastest PC, so this is going to take longer than you'll probably find. So if we go to the right here under fields, this will show you every table, every column of every table in there. Unless you right click it, you can hide it. So what we're about to go on to, we'll create a hidden data later on, but for now we're looking at space. We can go in here and we can grab description check and just pull it on. The first thing it will do is it'll try to figure out what data is. If it was a number, it would come up with a graph, a bar chart, but it's just failed pass at the minute because it's aggregating all the data together. What I can do is actually change how it's counting things. So under description check, I can drop this down and I can click count. Now that's just going to give me a list of every row, because all it's doing is counting every single row, is saying how many fields, how many plus there are, aggregating it all together. But what I can do as well is take in this description and I can just put it there, and it will then give me every description and the count of the descriptions. But what we're really after is to say, okay, how many is passing, how many is not passing. So what we can do is switch it out to a pie chart. And what we can do is hit count of description is the value. So we're counting how many fields, how many passes. But then we can feed in the same thing again to actually say, okay, the legend for this is pass fail. So tell me how many fails there are, how many passes there are. And there we go. We are passing 82.22%. This is, we're going to repeat this process several times for what we're doing today, but that's the fundamental idea of how Power BI works. You do a transformation, you load that data in, you pull it on, and you change the graph to how you want. If I wanted it to be a square one, I could do a square one instead. What this is doing is aggregating all the spreadsheets, so even the ones of previous data, which isn't ideal because we want to see the latest data. So what we can do is actually specify, say, hey, look, I just want the latest dates. So what I first need to do is tell the data what date it is. So I can do this by created by quite easily, and I can say only show me the data that's been created by recently. That's not going to help with the data set I've got because they're all just duplicates of each other. So what we want to do instead is actually specify what date the Excel was received on, and that's why I appended or prefixed the name of the file with the date. So if we go back to our transform data under home, we've got source name here. Now this source name, if we go back, so any step I take, I can go back to the previous step with the applied steps here, and I can roll that all the way back. And you can see the very first thing it did is pull in all the Excels. It's applied this custom function which applies that transformation, and then everything on top of that gets added in. So I've got the source name for all the Excels in here against every line, and I can drop this down here just to see that there's 4 in there. So that's the Excel names we've got. And we want to pull the date out of this, so if I click add column again, I can go in and extract text before delimiter. Delimiter. I never say that right. And this will ask us, okay, what text do you want before what string? So I can just put dash in here, and this will pull out that first date. Now that's still text, that's not a date. So if we want to change that, we can go up here to where it says ABC, which means it's a string, and we can just change that to date. And there we go, we've got something in the right date. Now that's very pernickety. You need to have the full 2022 in there. So what you could do if you had just had 220601, you can instead create condition add column, and then you can go into format, prefix, and assuming you want this only to be compatible from now until 2099, you could just prefix it with 21st, then apply the transformation, and that will give you your dates. So if we just close and apply that, now I've made a rookie mistake here. I've not renamed my column. It's just called text before delimiter. So let's just go back into transform data again. And what we can do, so some functions will ask you, okay, what do you want the column to be called when you do it? Some won't, so you'll need to go in to the column again, and we're just going in and renaming it. So if you just click it once, click it again, or right click rename, it's just double click, sorry. And we can just put in date in here. And now we've got a date column. So how do we then use that date to filter the pie chart, which I'll change it back to show me only the most recent information. Well, I mentioned the word there, filter. So what we can do is we can start applying filters to things. So with this pie chart, for example, if I just wanted to filter by a particular floor name, so I only have the pass-fail of spaces on a particular floor, I could just grab the floor name, pull it to filters on this visual, which means it's only applying to the thing I have selected. I could apply this to the entire page or the entire report, but I dragged it to the top one here, and I can just tick in, just show me information for first floor, and you can see these numbers, potentially you can't see these numbers, are reducing down, and you can see here, roof main, all of it's passing, for example. So we're going to do something similar with the date. So we're going to grab the date, filter on this visual. Now I can just pick the latest date, but that's not particularly intelligent. I want to just pick the latest information at any given time. So I can actually go in here and I can either pick relative date time, which allows me to say, show me any information, for example, relative date in the last day, in the last week, in the last month, year, 5 days, 5 years, whatever you want. But I want to pick the top, the latest date. So I go to top N, which means give me the top values. That's based on, and then I can drag date back in again, and I can pick latest date and the one latest date. So if you have several dates that are the same, it will get all of them, top one date by the latest date. Does that make sense? Cool. And I click apply. There we go. That's our description Kobe check for the latest Excels in that folder. No matter what I do to the previous Excels, if I delete them or not, that will stay the same for the latest Excel. If I bring in a new Excel with a date after the one that I've put in, it will then show that information automatically when I click refresh. Speaking of click refresh, that's it. You click refresh and it will load the same information in again. If you want to change the folder where that information is, you just go transform data, data source settings, and then you can just change source and point it to a different folder. And as long as that folder's got the same Excels in it with the same format, you can just then click refresh again and that'll pull the information in again. So you can go from one project to another without actually having to change your dashboard if you don't want to. So that's the easy stuff. That's literally transforming columns, aggregating the columns into a visual, and then filtering that visual. The next step we're going to do is pull in another column from the same Excel, and then make a link between the two columns by merging them together. So that I mentioned append earlier, in that all the Excels are appending one after the other. Merging means it actually adds in extra columns from other sources. So if we go to transform, first thing we're going to do, new source, more, folder. Now it doesn't matter if we're using the same folder over and over again, because it will recognize that the sources are the same, so we'll still only have one source to change if we want to change it. Just paste that back in, click OK. It will ask me again, combine and transform. I'm in the query editor here now, so it's not asking me to load it because I'm loading it from the transform bit. So, and this time we're going to go into component and click OK. Power BI does like to jump windows quite a bit, so you'll see me clicking back onto it every now and again. It's better to have two screens for this kind of work. So we go Kobe Excel's back in. Before I do anything else, let's just call that Kobe components. If I make any spelling mistakes, just ignore it. So you can see here, that's now pulled in the Kobe.components. We've still got some columns missing or used that we don't need. So we can do the same thing again, select everything else, remove all the columns just to remove that additional information. Really, if you were just wanting to do this one thing, you would probably remove all the columns but the columns you need. But what we're going to do here is we're going to figure out, okay, this is a space list here, and we're going to figure out, does 1C18 exist in this list, etc., etc. But what we don't want to do, and this is more of a best practice, is we don't want to refer back to the Kobe space that we're using for visuals. We want to actually create a sanitized list of spaces that are specific to the asset, maybe even just the latest spaces. We want to filter it before it goes anywhere else. So we can just right click and duplicate, and that'll create the exact same transformations. I'm just going to call this Kobe space lookup. And what I'm going to do is I can just roll back some of these things. I'm going to keep them in for now because this date can become important. If we get to it, we might not get to the bit where that becomes important. But what I can do here is with Kobe and merging, or not Kobe, sorry, with Power Query and merging, and with pretty much any data model and merging, there's different types of merge. So you can go from one to many, which means there's one unique key in one table, and it's mapping to many keys that are the same in another table. You can have many to many, which works very weirdly and sometimes doesn't, so you want to try and avoid it. You can have many to one, etc. So you want to make sure that you're trying to work as best as possible from a one to many or many to one relationship, okay? So that's why we're trying to sanitize list down into just unique space names. So what we can do, go into our space names, right click, remove duplicates. There we go, sanitize space name list. Now, I don't want any other information, so I can just go through here and remove all the other information I don't need. I just need the lists. I'm going to keep the date though. So remove all the columns. So I've just got all the spaces in all the Excels that are unique. If I wanted to filter this down and just have the spaces from the latest, we can use the filters on the column within the data set. This is quite useful if you have a massive data set and you actually only want to do a visual on a subset of that. You would filter it down in the data model first, like this, before loading it into the dashboard, so that when you click refresh, you're not loading all the information, you're just loading the information that's finalized in that data set. So we might just do, let's see, it is latest, and that will give us just the latest dates. So next, what we want to do is we want to actually pull in the space names from the Kobe space lookup into the component sheet, which sounds weird because it already has spaces. But what we can do is say, okay, match the space name in the Kobe component to the space name in this list, pull in something from this table. Anything that comes through that doesn't work means that it hasn't matched anything. It hasn't found anything in that table to pull through. So we're going to exploit that function by then querying what we pull through and saying if it's null, it hasn't matched anything. So that's easier done than what I've just said. You just go into component, you go into merge queries. Now you can merge multiple queries, we're just merging one query. And then it's asking you, what do you want to use to match together? So in this case, we want to use the Kobe space, the Kobe name, not name, but the Kobe space code. And then we want to go into space and Kobe space lookup, and we want to grab the names here. What it will then do is it will try and figure out the matching automatically for you. So in this case, left outer, all from first, matching from second, means it's trying to go through all the rows of the first table and match anything from the second table, but don't pull anything else in. I'm not going to go through anything else on that. That's the default. You probably don't need to do anything else with it. Use fuzzy matching if you don't want exact matches. That exponentially increases the time it takes to do this. And we don't want fuzzy matches. We want exact matches when we're validating. So we want to untick that. And look, it's telling me right here that we've got 21,810 components that are matching and 23,736 total. So there's some that isn't matching in there. If we just wanted a quick answer, if everything matched and this said 23,736 off 23,736, we can make the immediate judgment that everything's fine. We don't need to do any of this, but we want to visualize it, so we'll click OK. This will then pull in a table. Now, when it says table, it means multiple columns. So it's actually pulling in the name and the date off that table. What we can do is we can expand that out and just show one column. So if we click this button up here, it looks like a bit of a barbell. We can just say, I just want the name here, and that will pull in the name that we match to. And if it was doing it properly, which it absolutely should be, because it's relied upon by a lot of people, 1A101 here will match 1A1 wherever it is, just here. Unfortunately, Power Query doesn't necessarily respect the formatting of the Excels you're pulling in, so columns might shift around and things. So what we can do now is we can just do a conditional column again, just to specify if something's null, it's a fail. If it's not, it's a pass. Right? Does that make sense? So we can add column, conditional column. If, now this is called name1, this column. Again, I would rename it if I was doing it properly. Equals null. Fail. If not, pass. And that's now a throwaway column. I can just click and remove that. I don't need it anymore. That's now got this in. The conditional column itself, again, will ask you what name it is, so we don't have to repeat and do a transform to rename that. You want to try and reduce down your transforms as much as possible. So this is now the component space check. Component space check. I am dyslexic, so mouthing out spellings of things. There we go. And that's a good example as well, that you can always go back to a transform and edit it and then go back to where it was. Now, if anything you do in the previous transform messes up anything that happens after it, so for example, if you delete a column, go back a couple of steps and rename that column before you delete it, that's now trying to delete something that doesn't exist. It will not work. It will fail. You'll need to actually go back to that transform and change it to delete the thing you renamed. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Cool. So just remove that again. I deleted a column that wasn't renamed, so that's fine. I should have set a timer for this. Okay. Make sure I don't run over. I'm already running about 10 minutes over. So that loads that back in. So now the Kobe.component sheet comes through in all its glory. We've also got the space lookup. I'm not interested in it, so I'm just going to hide it. I've now got my components. Now what I want to do again is just check the component space check, drag that in. You could actually just click on the visual, which will bring in a blank visual, drag that onto the values, drag it onto the legend, change this to count. That is already changed to count, and you see it's done it automatically. Now, if I were to go into space here and take this date and try and filter the way I've done it, it will not work, because this date does not relate to this table. It relates to the space table only. So we need to actually relate a date in here. So we would need to go back into our Kobe.component transform and actually do the same logic again with the file name on that sheet too. So we'll just do that quickly just now. We'll just go add column, format, or I'm sorry, not format, extract, text before delineator. Use a hyphen, call that date. Date already exists. I'm on space, sorry, never mind. Make sure you're clicking the right table when you're doing it. So I'm on component here. Where are we? Source name, add column, extract, text before delineator. Change that to date. And change that to date. Whoops. Good. There we go. I think I clicked the wrong thing there. Load that back in. And now we'll go to this visual. Grab that date. Pull it onto the filter in this visual, and again we're just doing the same thing, top N, date, latest, 1. And there we go, we've got the pass-fail information for components that don't have a space that exists in the space table. If we wanted to visualize that a wee bit more and give people an idea of where that's actually failing, we could create a table, grab in the name of the components, for example, and maybe add in the space as well so we know what space they're in, like this. And what we can now do is click on the fail, and that will filter anything that fails. Now this is where what I'm showing you today isn't the be-all and end-all, because this is failing things that have the space comma space, which isn't actually a fail for doors and windows. So what we would have to do there is actually create some sort of transformation that actually takes out that and separates it into single things, and then merge the pass, fail, and or. So you would actually, I'm probably going into too much detail, you would create a new row for every space. So you would have duplicate columns. You would apply the test with the merge that I just showed you. you would then actually recombine the rows and do an OR function on that pass-fail, so that if either of them failed, that line then fails overall, so that we retain one function. Half of Power BI is figuring out how to get to the end before you actually figure out how to do it in Power BI. I can't teach you that one, I'm afraid. That's just learning as you go. We're not going to do that today, you'll be glad to know. So, now that we've got that all sorted, the one thing I wanted to cover is data modeling. So at the minute, what I've showed you the glimpse of a data model in that I've merged two tables together, but that's a very static relationship. And if you wanted to do that across several different sheets, it would take time. And equally, when I'm adding filters to this, if I were to go in and I wanted to filter the entire sheet by one date, not just one visual, I can't do that with multiple date fields in multiple different columns. I need one date field. So I need a way of telling all the different sheets that this date is the same date as every other date, it's the same data. So what I can do is create a master date lookup table, and I'm going to show you a bit of the advanced editor and how to do that. And then what we're going to do is data model that so that every date on every sheet relates back to that master date list. That sounds probably very complicated and probably didn't make any sense me describing it. Hopefully it makes sense here. So the first thing we're going to do is go back into our model editor, transform data. And what we want to do now is just cheat and copy and paste some code from the internet to give us a range of dates. So I can just go in here and go new query, blank query. And that will just create me a blank thing, right? If up here you'll see advanced editor. And this will show you the fundamental principle of Power BI. You let a source do something, you apply transformations, and then you input the result of those transformations. I will show you what that looks like when you have actual code. So under the resources thing, if you've downloaded the set, there's a dates text file, which looks like this. It's very complicated. I'm just going to copy and paste that. I'm going to replace everything that's in here. But depending on the code you receive, you always have to start with let on every bit of code you put in here, and you always have to end with in. So if you've not got that, you can't paste everything in, but I've included everything. So I'm just going to replace all of that. And you can see let is here, and in is there. Now source here equals let because we're not actually starting with a source. We're starting with some parameters. So you can see here, number of days, end date, start date. It's actually referencing something called end date and something called start date. So if I click done now, it's going to break. It's not going to do anything because end date and start date don't exist. So those are things called parameters. This is how you input static single line things in. So I could go in, right click, new parameter instead of new query, and I can specify a parameter. So date start. Let's start with 2020. And I'm just going to create another one, date end, and I'm going to end with 2025. And what this function does, this query, is it expands out, start year, sorry, I've called these something wrong, start year, end year. Important everything's named correctly. There we go. And what this query does is it lists every single date from the start of 2020 to the end of 2025 based on these queries. But all the other transformations is just pulling out the logic of that date, when the financial quarter is, what day is it, what week is it, what number of days is it in the year. So if we wanted to specify the results of Kobe by financial quarter, we could do that. So I'm not merging anything here. I'm just going to call this dates. And I'm just going to load that in. And then we're going to actually create the connection, the data model between those dates and all the other tables which have dates in it. Okay? So if we click here on the bottom, on the far left-hand side, you'll see that Power BI by default tries to do stuff for you. It usually makes the arse of it, so usually you have to delete everything. But you can see here, because we made a merge, it already knows that this data relationship sort of exists. We can delete that. The merge is done before loading, so any relationship after the fact we don't need. I'm just going to leave it in for now. But you can see here there's dates as its own thing, which isn't connected to component or space. What we want to do is say this date is equal to this date, and this date is equal to this date. So we just grab it, drag it onto date. I think I missed it there. If you click on the arrow that's generated, it will tell you what it's actually doing. This should look familiar from the merge we did earlier. I missed it. I had created them by mistake. So I'm just going to correct it and change it to date here. And you can see, because it's going from spaces to date, so there's loads of spaces, but that advanced date query we did only has one date per line, so it's going many to one. And single means that one is only filtering the other. You can't click on the other and filter dates. You can only click on dates and filter spaces. Okay? That becomes quite important when you have a ton of data, because you can't filter things if there's conflicting filters. So if I've got dates that can be filtered by spaces both ways, and I've got dates that actually filters components somewhere else, and it filters both ways, but then components filter spaces, I've got a cyclical relationship and it doesn't work. So you want to try in your data model, where possible, to create single one-to-many or many one-to-one relationships. You don't want to create too many many-to-manys or too many bi-directional filters. They have their purpose, so if you're careful. So we do that for here, and we'll just do the same thing for dates. Here, automatically creates it. So what we're saying here by the direction of this arrow is dates. When I click on anything in the dates column, it's going to filter anything that it matches within this Kobe.space and the Kobe.description table. Click here. So let's just make a wee bit of room. Let's just get rid of these filters. So let's go back to visualizations just for a minute. So the other very useful thing in here is called a slicer. If you've ever used Power Pivot or tables within Excel, you can create slicers with tables in Excel. Effectively, it's a way of filtering. So what we can just do here is go down to our dates table, and we're just going to grab dates and drag it on here. And now I can go in and I can filter both these. Now, if I go to 2025, I've not received anything for 2025, so it's not going to show up. But the beauty of this is, because I've told these filters to only show me the latest dates that there's data for, if I filter that data to show me previous dates, these graphs are just going to show me the latest dates that I've already filtered. So I can go back and actually show me stuff that's just the latest information here and here. And the most powerful thing about doing it this way is I can now go in and create a graph and say, you know what, put dates on an axis and give me the description check of spaces like this, right? Doesn't look like anything, right? But if I go in and click this, expand down all levels, I can now give you a day by day, or I can go up to year, quarter, month, and I can zoom out and see what the average is at particular dates, and effectively visualize a histogram of that. This is counting all descriptions, so I do want to put in the description check here as a legend, and that will show me, let me just get rid of these, and let me just expand this out. So this is now showing me the count of passes and the count of fails across time. So I can start to visualize. So this is where you might be asking yourself, I can do all my Kobe checks with a QC checker, which is true. What you can't do is check all the folders at once and show a history of progression of the checks across time. And that's what we're kind of doing here. And if I load in more Excels now, I've just written 80% of my job as an information manager. I can just go in, drag the Excels into a folder, click refresh, and get the latest results, and show how that's improved over time or not. Does that make sense? Cool. So to show you how to make this look pretty, which is I think the ultimate goal here, what we can do is use everything we've just done and put it into something that looks like this. Now there's two things in here that we're maybe getting to and maybe not getting to that will require DAX. We'll see if we get to it at the end. I want to leave about 5 minutes to go over some of the use cases. But to get everything to look pretty, we're just going to go into our pages here, and I'm just going to use a wallpaper. So if you don't have anything selected, your visualization pane is selecting the entire report. So I can go into format page here, and I can pick my background. Where are we? So first off, don't go by 16 by 9. Make it a bit bigger. You'll thank me later. You can only go down so far in the text size, but you can go and make the dashboard bigger, so you can get smaller text. 1920, let's make it 1080p, 1080. Let's put a background on it, so let's go and browse for an image. Here's one I prepared earlier. It starts off at 100% transparency, so we can make it transparent, but there's our background. And we're just going to create our pie charts again. So let's just go in, grab a pie chart, put it in the right position. You can turn on and off snapping somewhere, I can't remember where. So you can put it formally, but if you've got something selected here, you can go into visualization, grab your format visual. You won't be able to do anything with it until it has data. So if we go in here, let's do this as our space check. Let's grab our description check and our count, change it to count again. And we're just going to go in. I'm going to change it up here and actually filter by the dates that we've now data modeled. We don't need to actually use the dates from the actual table itself anymore because we've merged them all together. That date is the other date. Why hasn't this shown up? Maybe I haven't data modeled it correctly. Let's see, dates. Latest dates. Dates, latest. There we go. Cool, that looks horrible. So we can now add kind of visualization, customization to the visual itself. So they're here. So we can do things like change the color slices. So pass, I don't like to do green red, I like to do gray red. Like this. I can change my background. So anything that's common across all visualizations, you can change under general. So things like background, drop shadow. So I'm just going to go into effects and I'm actually just going to be lazy and change that to 50. And I'm just going to go in and add a drop shadow and a border that adds it in. I think gray and red is fairly self-explanatory, so maybe I don't actually need to put the labels on there. I don't need to put the legends on there. I'm actually going to put the labels out as something else, so I just want a quick visual for that. I do need a title, so I'm just going to go into my title and call that space description check. I'm not going to get to doing the entire dashboard, but this will give you an idea. And now I want to put in a total in here instead of on the actual pie chart. So I can use something called a card, which literally would just list one bit of information. So this is where this starts to break down. Now, if I wanted to do just the count of passes, that's easy enough. I can just go in, description check, which will give me if I change it to count, will give me the total count. And then I can just filter by pass, okay? And that will just give me the total passes. I can filter by date as well. I'm not going to do that again, but you can filter by latest results. And I can move that down, change this thing. What I can't do here is actually give you a percentage. Percentage is something you would not be able to filter into because you need both pass and fail. And well, you need total and pass to calculate that. So that's where you have to do something called a measure. So there's two sides of Power Query. There's the Power Query side of things, which I've shown you, which is through the coding in the advanced editors called Power M. This is what we do after the data model is loaded to measure things off the data model. It is quicker and can calculate more rows at a time. It's called DAX. You might have heard DAX earlier if you were in other sessions. I believe it was mentioned a few times. But we can actually do a measure. Now, we can just go in and right-click on the table here and click New Measure and start typing away if you know DAX. I don't know DAX. I know it very little. But we can do things like very quick calculations. So I could just do, count. So if you're familiar with Excel, let's just call this measure 1 equals count A of description and Kobe.description. That will give me all filled values of description as a measure, and I can drag that measure on. And that will give me, see, it's a number, so it's coming in as a graph. I can put that back to a card, and that will give me a number. That's just giving me the number of rows that aren't blank. But I want to do something more complicated. I want to filter that calculation at the calculation level. Now, if I were to type this manually, it would be calculate, bracket, table number, column number, filter, expression, blah, 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 blah. Don't need to know any of that. What you can do is right click and go to quick measure, and this will just ask you what you want to calculate. So if I want to calculate a filtered value, so I just go filtered value. It's useful to know the lingo to find things. I want to calculate space. Let's just do the count of the description check. To be fair, I've been using description check as a count this entire time. You could have used any row. We're just counting the rows. So I could just go in here and actually just do, count name like this. But now I want to actually filter it. So I grab description, and I want it, not description, sorry, description check. And I want to filter just the pass. This will then give you the code, just like that. So calculate bracket, count A, we've already covered, but then it's adding this extra bit to say, for this, give me the N, give me the results that equal to pass. And I can just pull that on, right? So now we have the total amount of this space, right? Have we? Did I do this correctly? Measure 1, count A, no I didn't, Kobe.space. So let's do Kobe space. Again, I don't really care what I'm using here. It's just going to count all the rows. I've got my pass. I can now just create another measure and go, what's the formula for calculating percentage? I'm sure everyone knows. It is count of name pass. Oh, I need to type the description word, percentage pass. Sorry, percentage pass equals count of, and it will find it, divided by, I just use measure 1 here, so obviously rename it something that makes more sense, like that. And there we go. Now I'm not timesing by 100 here, because what I can then do is click this measure and tell it it's a percentage, and then drag that in like this. And then that will give me the percentage pass as a calculated value. That measure can be used for anything you want. So again, if I wanted to then go make a graph, percentage pass, I could just grab that as the y-axis, grab the date as the x-axis, and then start pulling that down to give me percentage pass over time as a single value. So I'm going to move on to examples now. What I try to do with my dashboards when I'm validating is try to multi-layer it. So when you have X number of people looking at it at X number of levels, they have different requirements, and I didn't want to specify one dashboard for one requirement set. So what I do is I give an overview, which is just a number, pass, fail. Is it 80% pass? Is it 90% pass? You can aggregate from different tables, so you can say if it's 80% pass in space and 100% pass in description, that equals 90% overall. So you can just give a big red, amber, green to someone who just wants a red, amber, green. But then what you can do is set up tables to then filter down. If you click on a fail, it will tell you where it's failing, so the technician can come back and fix it. So let's just open that. Examples, Kobe. Give this a second to open, it's doing a lot of things. So this is me trying to replicate the QC checker purely in Power BI. So all you need to do is drag Excels into a folder and click refresh. This does take about 10 minutes to refresh now. It's quite a lot of calculations. It won't take 10 minutes to load, I promise. But while that's loading in the background, has it loaded? No, let's just get rid of these. Give it a fighting chance with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Let's see, come on. As I said, Power BI can be a bit weird with what's on top. So let's just go to, so that's a summary, telling a summary per sheet. Give it a wee second to load the visuals. Come on, let's just go to type. And then every single column is checked for Kobe like this, and you can see where the Kobe's failing. Now, this is all great. We've made a QC checker Mark II that's slightly quicker and slightly more aggregate, and we can get custom columns. Where Power BI really comes into its own is when you start looking further afield in the data set you're validating. So you'll see here some of these things are blank, because what I've done is connected this dashboard to an asset information delivery plan that says at stage 4 we're only checking this information. So if I were to go in here and actually pick stage 5 as a filter, we can go stage 5. Now this is called the basic filter. We've actually got an asset information delivery plan that's got unit class, and then that's the data for it. So we can actually then filter by only for the unit class elements that have got that data will it actually evaluate it. So if we've got something that's unit class, it's only looking at type name, it's not going to fail everything else and then file the results. It's only going to look at type name because that master Excel is there saying what everything's happening. So you can start to pull information together. On that note, COBie classification and COBie validation really isn't what Power BI was designed for, but it works very well. What other things that we have here, just to go through them, embodied carbon calculations. So Power BI is a great visualer, it's quicker than Excel. We have scripts that pull information out of the Revit model. We can go in and just load that into a folder, click refresh, and have a nice visual for our client. And I'm going to show you two others if they load in the next 5 minutes. So other things we have, the one I can't show you today, which I really would have loved to show you because it's my best work, is so for Holmes Miller, we developed effectively a company dashboard for finance. So that's pulling everything in from Sage so we can track outstanding invoices. That's linked to our CRM so we know what projects they're assigned to. It's linked to our task list so we know who is actually in charge of those projects. So they can just click their name and see all their outstanding invoices. That's linked to our forecasting so we can see, okay, this is our invoices, this is our expected invoices, this is our timesheets, which is an SQL database. Are we actually profitable at this stage? Where have we not been profitable? Are we going to be profitable in the future? All this stuff, so that's SQL, that's Sage, we're pulling it from Union Square, our document management system, we're pulling it from Excel, SharePoint Excel is very useful. And we're just kind of pulling all this information together. So for example, this is very RAM heavy, so if you're doing this, have a lot of RAM in your PC. We'll just wait for these to load. I shouldn't have opened all of them at once. This is not even closed yet. Summary. There we go. So this is validating options. So this actually was pulled out of Revit using design options, and we can now look at the embodied carbon from design options. On a side note, this is used Dynamo to pull in the ICE database and do a lot of calculations in the background. This is purely just visualizing the information, which is ultimately what you want to do with the data. Another couple of things it read, so this saved my bacon recently. Again, I'm not going to show you it. We received a 600-page EIR in PDF format that was clearly exported from Morta, but we weren't given access to Morta, so we had to respond to it. You can pull PDFs into this and pull PDF information out in tables and aggregate it all together, so that saved our bacon. We have a manual audit in place that uses BIM Collab. BIM Collab has a very good BCF format, which is an XML, effectively. You can pull that in. You can pull all the images in for that as well. Images is weird. You need to use base 64, but you can do it. This laptop is rubbish. Don't use a Surface. Let's see, come on. This will close. So sorry, that's our resource forecasting. So this is just this is mock data from 2020. So this is flagging up if someone spends over 5 hours, someone's forecasted for more than 5 hours a day or for more than 8 hours a day on a project, it will flag it up in red. It will also tell us our total available resources and look at our holiday allotment to make sure that it doesn't dip below our allocated resources in forecasting. And then things like model quality checks, we do in BCF, but we can also call in various checks and actually pull in the images from BCF to give to someone so they have the images there to say this is wrong, this is why, this is a score we give you. And this all aggregates as well, so we have scripts that run across the office to pull in the validating information for like Revit model checking. And we can then just have a model quality assessment of every project in the office side by side using the same metrics. So it's a very robust system, even just in this pure basic sense. When you get online, You've got the option, as I said, for schedule refreshing. You can pull information from several online resources. You can push it out to your phone. You can actually, I didn't show it, but you can go into view mobile layout and actually specify the mobile layout as a separate thing, so you can actually read it on your mobile. All really cool stuff you can do online. It's not cheap, $7.99 per user per month, and that's for receiving the dashboard as well as publishing it. If you want to embed it, it's £800 a month. If you want a full premium business license, you're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. But for basic model quality sharing, if you're not too concerned about security and you just want to upload the dashboard for someone to see, you can use a free license to do that. But it's a public link, so that's pretty much Power BI. Sorry, I've not